Hello, and thank you for joining us today. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the 1970 UNESCO Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit import, export, and transfer of ownership of cultural property. For its anniversary, Blue Shield Germany and students from BTU Cottbus are conducting interviews of notable members in the cultural heritage field as a part of a social media campaign. The interviews will allow us to gain different international perspectives when discussing the fight against illicit trafficking and their approach to restitution of cultural property. We are joined by Michaela Scheibe from the German Library Association. Hello, Michaela, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Pleasure.
Michaela Scheibe comes from a background of history and political science and has completed the library traineeship at the University and State Library in Halle. Ms. Scheibe started her professional career working in the Department of Manuscripts in the State Library and is currently the chairwoman of the Commission of Provenance Research of the German Library Association, an institution that for 60 years has represented the interests of libraries in the country. In her position as chairwoman of the Commission, Ms. Scheibe has been called a detective of books or a real-life Sherlock Holmes, finding the truth behind the books and in a way, voicing their life story. This has become particularly important in the aftermath of World War II, where entire collections of books and other paper-based objects were all of a sudden moved around. Before we begin, I take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Felipe Echeverri Velasco. I come from Cali, Colombia, where I did my undergraduate in architecture. I am finishing my master's in World Heritage Studies at BTU University, and I am project assistant to Blue Shield Germany. Michaela, this is very fascinating work that you do. I'm eager to know more. Let us begin with the questions we have prepared for you.
Okay.
For the first question, in the media, we are very used to hearing of looted art and archaeological objects. However, looting happens with all types of cultural properties. This includes books, manuscripts, archives, which are also covered by the convention, which we are here celebrating its 50th year. In the German context, however, there is another set of principles that is important for you as a provenance researcher, namely the Washington Principles. Can you tell me a bit more about the context of these principles and how they direct your everyday work?
Okay. Well, the Washington Conference on Holocaust-era assets was held in December 1998, and I think it is really a historic turning point in dealing with the legacy of Nazi art theft, or the theft of cultural assets as a whole. Because after 1945, after the end of World War II, quite a lot of things were done concerning the restitution of looted objects, but it was not at all finished, one can say. So this was another effort to deal with the remains of the art theft. And the Washington Declaration that was released after the conference laid somehow the foundation for systematic provenance research into art or other cultural assets stolen, mostly from Jewish citizens, but not only, of course. And those Washington principles, they set out aims to the effect that collections should be checked systematically for Nazi looted items, and that those items that were identified should be returned to the pre-war owners or their heirs, or to find other just and fair solutions. That's the point, that you can find just and fair solutions other than just restitute an object. And that is quite a wide range of possibilities we have got there. So we move there in an, not only in the area of legal questions, but in questions of that getting to fair solutions. For the German libraries and German cultural institution, it's very important that in December 1999, 1 year later, the German Federation, the Länder, I think it's always called Länder, and national associations of local authorities showed their commitment to the Washington Principles by making a statement on the tracing and return of Nazi-confiscated art, especially Jewish property. That's called the Common Statement, or the Joint Declaration. It's a very long name for the thing, but that stresses that the identification and the return of Nazi-looted art is one of the core tasks of our public cultural institutions. So that's the basis for our whole work.
Thank you, Michaela, for that clarification. It's very interesting to see how there's different documents working together in your field and in general in the heritage field. For my next question, it's also about the Washington Principles, but the question is, why are the Washington Principles important when you think of the implementation of the 1970 Convention and the development of provenance research in Germany?
Well, I think the starting point really for cultural institutions in Germany to get more personal power or well, financial power into the field of provenance research was the Washington Conference and the Joint Declaration. So after 1999, we have got a real important impulse concerning provenance research, because project funding was made possible then in a much wider range than before by the German government, especially by the Ministry of State for Culture and the Media. And we have got the federally funded, the German Lost Art Foundation. Now they had a few predecessors, but now it's the German Lost Art Foundation, and is really a major asset for provenance research into Nazi-looted cultural assets. And they are a real key sponsor for provenance research in Germany. And we've got just quite a lot of projects that were concerned with library collections in those funding. And that was very, very important to get really provenance research in the projects. That means they are they work a few years in the libraries, but they are now sometimes we are very lucky and we can keep those provenance researchers as a real core task of the library that's going on and going on. So it's no use just to have people for a few years to research the collections, but we try to build competence in the libraries to continue the work. And we are not at an end at present, of course. On the other hand, we have got different working groups of the provenance researchers that were founded, and they bring together all the competence of provenance researchers in libraries, in museums, in archives. So we have got a special library working group which is acting under the roof of the German Library Association, which unites about 120 provenance researchers from libraries in Germany, but also in Austria and even in Poland, actually. And they have very fruitful discussions about current cases, and they help a lot by organizing common restitutions for books, for example, from different libraries with the same provenance. And these initiatives save, I think, a lot of time, and what is more, they save the rightful owners or their heirs a lot of trouble. Because you must see most looted private collections were totally dispersed, and in consequence quite a lot of libraries have identified books from some large collections that are always the same, and you can imagine that contacting the heir of such a collection every few weeks or a few months is very stressing. So this is what we think have got as a very positive result of the Washington Principles and the research into illicit acquisition.
Thank you very much for that. And now I think the last question, we want to know a bit more about your detective skills. And the question is, when it comes to the methods of provenance research, what is the difference in searching the provenance of a book or a paper-based object in comparison to, let's say, archaeological pieces or an object of archaeological significance? What traces are usually left on written material that can help you identify its owner?
Yes, well, books, I think, mostly underrated, belonging their power to witness provenance and witness their former owners. So books are very interesting objects, and I think in comparison to archaeological objects, books are very apt to bear traces of their former owners, like handwritten notes or a handwritten name. You may remember you always write your name in your own books, perhaps. Most of us do. You see library stamps in the books. You can see book plates designed for private collections, probably graphically very interesting and, but yes, very well done book plates. You can always recognize again, so they are very helpful often. So books can tell how intensely they were read, or perhaps they were not read at all. If the pages are not cut, then you can see nobody read that book. But often there are notes on the margins, whatever. There are underlinings, and you can, if you really go into the depth of provenance research, you may identify a former owner by an underlining, a special underlining. You perhaps might know only this person has done, or it's typical for that person. So that might help, but you need a lot of research and a lot of experience and knowledge to interpret such evidence right. To identify a person that's behind the evidence. Well, and you might see in the books sometimes when they were purchased by their former owner, so you have a date, or you may know what they have cost because somebody put in the price. Or you may know how much money was spent on the binding of the book because someone noted that down as well. So you have quite a lot of evidence that might tell you the biography of the book, of the object. But on the other hand, you might have a book, because the problem with books is they are serially produced. They are printed in, for thousands or 10,000s of identical objects first, but then they come to people who use them. And if you have a new book, that's a problem for the provenance researcher because you see nothing. So you have sources outside the book, perhaps, if you're lucky, that tell you when a library bought a book. And you might have a number in the book, which is very cryptical, perhaps. But if you know what that number means, you can get the link to a source outside, and you can know what that meant. And there may be a lot of information you can find outside. So I think books are very, very interesting and can tell you a lot. On the other hand, you have objects like statues or sculptures, and they are not quite as apt. You will not put your name on it if you buy it. You will be careful that it does not have any traces of you because you want it to be as it was. And the book is something you may want to leave your traces in it.
Wow, Michaela, that's fascinating to hear that. I'm kind of eager to go into my books and sign them all right now. Michaela, thanks again for taking the moment to speak with us. It's been a great pleasure to hear about your work and the important input to the field of cultural heritage. To everyone else watching, Please make sure to visit the link provided below this video to see more perspectives from international organizations and actors in the heritage field to learn about their diverse perspectives on illicit trafficking. Thank you.